Okay, so I just started broadcasting, so people should be showing up right now. And then I'll start it like a little bit after 5.
Okay, sounds good.
Hey everyone, just sit tight for a little bit. We're gonna wait a couple minutes, make sure everyone's in the webinar, and then we're gonna start. All right, so hi everyone, my name is Austin, and I'll be hosting this webinar on behalf of Ideas. And I'm just gonna start with a little introduction of who we are at Ideas and then pass it on to our speaker. So what Ideas is a nonprofit organization in California, and our mission is to bridge the gap between academia and industry by bringing together professionals and students and young professionals and experts together, all to work together in data science, AI, and blockchain. And so this is a roadmap of some of the places we've been over the last few years. We've been slowly growing and having larger and larger conferences and hackathons and much more occurring over the last year. So these are some of the places we've been. We've been all over the US and also some in Canada. And so this is our global blockchain hackathon series, which we've been having all over the US and also in Toronto. So this is an event where we have a bunch of people come together and pitch their blockchain ideas and also make some blockchain projects, and we give out prizes to the top teams of each category. And here's just a short video on some of our conferences that we've been doing. Okay, and here's some of our contact information, our phone, email, and website. And if you'd like to see if we have any events coming up in your area, then definitely go to our website below at ideassn.org and see if we have any upcoming 2019 events in your area. And so without further ado, I'll pass it on to Morvareed, who's going to be doing a presentation on blockchain and law.
So my name is Morvareed Salehpour. I'm a lawyer who works with blockchain businesses and tech businesses and helps them with their legal issues, from formation and contracts to compliance issues and going to court to litigate when business disputes arise. So today we're going to talk about blockchains and the law, and we're going to go through some slides and then I'll answer some questions afterwards. All right. So one of the first issues with blockchains are how things can go wrong. So there are several ways where there can be issues with transactions that are occurring on a blockchain. So for example, one way things that can go wrong on a blockchain is just from smart contract error. So one way to think about this is the DAO hack. So that was an example of this, where 50 million was hacked, and that was the hacker was able to take advantage of an error in the smart contract code, and that caused the Ethereum fork in 2016. In addition to just smart contract error, things can still go wrong in a very traditional way with a blockchain transaction. So there could be fraud that's committed. An example of this is thinking about a supply chain blockchain, and with those kind of blockchains, there's often a tracking device involved in the goods that are being transacted. So you can think about it when there is a good that's traveling from one location to another in the supply chain. Someone at some point may take the tracking device and put it on a different good than what you as the buyer think you're receiving. And given there is a smart contract now, the smart contract will already automatically pay out, and you don't discover that you have not received what you have bargained for until later. And at that point, there's been a fraud that's been committed on you. The result of either of these situations is that there is a business dispute that has arisen, and it's now more complicated given that the transaction is occurring on a decentralized system versus a traditional centralized method. So given that these issues are more complicated, what are kind of the challenges that arise with these blockchain-based disputes? So some of the issues here are jurisdiction, liability, and enforcement. So we're going to talk about jurisdictional issues as an initial matter. So in blockchain transactions, because they're occurring on these nodes that are located around the world, it basically results in a situation where the transaction could be subject to the laws of every country where a node is physically located. This results in a situation where there's potentially conflicting laws and regulations that will apply to that transaction. As a result of that, courts then have to address conflict of law issues. And that analysis, having the court have to do that analysis and brief it, makes litigation more complicated, and it drives up the cost of litigation, which in turn will negatively impact parties with fewer resources. Another kind of complication here with jurisdictional issues is that many blockchain businesses have tried to find loopholes to avoid US law and jurisdiction. Well, they can't really do that in most situations. And case law is already developing, affirming that idea. So for example, there is the In re Tezos securities litigation, which is a multi-district litigation based out of Northern California, meaning that there was a lot of class actions filed against them. They've been consolidated into this large action. There, the court recently, Tezos moved for a motion to dismiss against several Swiss entities, and the court recently held that one of the Swiss entities couldn't avoid US law and jurisdiction by structuring the legal entity abroad. And the court said it was the actual situation of the transaction that's important, the actual circumstances, versus maybe something they had tried to put a contract term in, yet that, they said, was not sufficient when the actual transaction involved US circumstances. So for example, there was a lot of the overwhelming majority of the nodes were located on US soil. The website through which the transaction, the sales of the securities had happened it was in Arizona. The founders were located in the US. So having all those circumstances being considered, the court said, well, it's obvious that you were transacting business in the US, you were engaging US consumers, you are basically, it goes back to the idea that in US law that if you're taking advantage of commerce somewhere, you're subject to its jurisdiction. So the court said that US securities laws will apply. It's similarly interesting, and there's a recent recent SEC action against an exchange called Ether Delta, which they had basically sold, created a trading platform for tokens and had not registered with the SEC as an exchange or found an appropriate exemption. And they were fined recently because even though the founder was based in Austria and the business had been set up registered in the Marshall Islands, they were engaging in business in the US, and US investors were transacting business on their platform. So the SEC said federal securities laws apply, and regardless of the fact that you're using cryptocurrency and you're registered in a foreign country. And as a result, the Ether Delta founder was charged with operating on unregistered securities exchange and settled for $300,000, which was the disgorgement of profits he had earned, in addition to $13,000 in prejudgment interest and a penalty on top of that, which was likely lower because he was cooperating with the SEC. So another area where issues arise with these transactions is liability. So this is the question of who is responsible for losses that are caused by smart contract error. So for example, this becomes the question of, is it the developer that's liable? Is it the centralized parties who are in charge of the blockchain who are liable? And one thing to consider right now is people like to say that blockchains are decentralized entities. That's not really true. Most of the currently existing blockchains are centralized and have centralized parties and entities in charge. Of course, the private blockchains are clearly have centralized parties in charge, but even the ones that are not private are still centralized. For example, EOS has the block producers who are the centralized parties. Other blockchains where, especially the smaller ones where they have a limited number of node operators or miners, are obviously controlled by those entities who can at any point take control of 51% and institute their own governance rules. And additionally, given that they are such a limited number, they're more easily able to locate and pursue when there is an issue on a blockchain, a transaction dispute. So another issue to go around with this is, given the issue with when things go wrong on a blockchain and someone is going to be held responsible, for example, where there is an error in the smart contract code and people lose millions of dollars amount of cryptocurrency. Someone's going to be called into court for that, and it's likely to be these centralized parties and developers. And that kind of shows that any truly decentralized blockchain is unlikely to succeed on a wide-scale basis, not only because governments will want the ability to exercise control over the blockchains, but users will prefer actors who can enforce governance when disputes begin to be commonplace. For example, when right now people have issues where they may lose their private key. Well, if someone's losing millions of dollars in cryptocurrency because they don't have the private key, they're going to want a centralized actor to approach and have assistance in being able to recover that. So another area where issues arise with these type of transactions are enforcement issues. So, for example, there's a case that's pending in the Eastern District of New York, which is Borla versus Nano, formerly known as Railbox. So in that situation, the plaintiff, who was a nano investor, has alleged securities violations and fraudulent representations by Nano and its founders that arose from 170 million in Nano that was stolen from an Italian digital currency exchange called BitGirl in February 2018. So one of the issues with this case is, in addition to the damages the plaintiff is seeking, he has also sought a court-ordered rescue fork to compensate the victims of the theft. So that's a really interesting idea. First of all, how would say the court even agrees that a rescue fork is an appropriate form of relief? How does the court effectuate that order? Who does it send that order to? It obviously doesn't have jurisdiction over the Italian digital currency exchange. How is it further, even if it was somehow able to send that order out and effectuate it? How does it disallow the individual users of the blockchain to basically force them to proceed on the disallow them from proceeding on the unforked protocol? So it's something that's not really realistic in a sense. You can't prevent people from proceeding forward on the different protocols. So then there are different situations where we see these issues and complexities come into play. So we're going to go through these couple areas, for example, divorce and crypto assets, copyright and blockchain, node operator liability, and privacy and blockchain. But before we do that, I want to talk about some of the more recent kind of case developments in this space. So we also have a situation where there's a lot that's happening in litigation that's trying to address some of these issues. So for example, there is a case against, so if you're familiar with Centra Tech, they basically tried to say that they were selling this, or they were creating a product which was going to be a credit card where you could use it in brick and mortar stores, but you were using cryptocurrency. Well, it was pretty much seems like it was a fraudulent situation. The SEC came after them, indicted them, and there's also a class action that's been filed against them on behalf of plaintiffs who invested money in Centra Tech. So recently, the plaintiffs moved for a temporary restraining order to safeguard the proceedings from the ICO that were raised in the ICO. So the judge decided that the tokens offered by Centra Tech were securities investment contracts, no surprise there, and he imposed an asset freeze on the ICO wallet. So that's really interesting because it's, those funds are now saved for the plaintiffs when they succeed in that case. And that's really interesting because I think it's probably a situation where it's been more easier to enforce that kind of order, given that they know where the wallet is still, ICO wallet is, and the people at Centra Tech are more prone to be willing to cooperate, given that they are also facing the criminal action. Other kind of cases that are developing in this space is, just yesterday there was 2 SEC enforcement actions that were settled against AirFox and Paragon because they had done ICOs and not complied with securities laws, and the SEC obviously has come out. ICOs are appropriately securities. The only non-security is Bitcoin at this point, and then Ether as well, even though at the beginning it was a security, now it's transformed into a currency. So they basically settled with these companies and said they need to re-register their digital assets as securities, and they need to return funds to the people who invested. So that's a situation that people who have done ICOs are going to have to come to agreements with the SEC, or they will be facing further litigation. Additionally, this week there was a admitted into another case, which is this U.S. versus Zalavisky in Eastern District, New York. So this defendant had basically done an ICO, and he had said that he had tried to tokenize diamonds and tokenize real estate, and he didn't actually have any real estate or diamonds that he was tokenizing, so it was a fraud. And he initially, earlier this summer, he had challenged the criminal action against him and said, you know, securities laws don't apply. And the judge found that securities laws do apply, and they're meant to be interpreted flexibly, and tokenization doesn't allow you to avoid those kind of laws. And as a result, he just entered into a guilty plea. So this is the first guilty plea we've seen, and it's a pretty interesting development. So now let's talk about divorce and crypto assets in particular. So I'm going to talk about the kind of property scheme in California, just because I'm California based, and I think it'll be easier than talking about different types of community property and separate property. So in California, there are two different types of property. There is community property and separate property. So community property is any property that you earn or purchase during marriage, or purchase with, you know, funds that you have earned or have from during the time of marriage. Separate property is anything that you earned before marriage, that you owned before marriage, that you inherit at any time. Those are two different types of property. The issue becomes when, for example, money is very fungible. So when you put both community property and separate property into a bank account, it becomes commingled, and it's all assumed to be community property because it's difficult to be able to trace it, to say, well, I meant to purchase this asset with separate property, or I meant to purchase it with community property. That's a difficult thing to do. As a result, it's often assumed to just be community property. Well, when you think about it in the crypto asset sense, well, wallets are equivalent of bank accounts. And if you have funds from pre and post marriage in there, you're commingling assets. So the issue arises there is when a divorce situation arises and you have enforcement issues, because as an initial matter, one spouse may not even understand digital assets or blockchain. So that creates even an understanding issue there. But two, even if there is some understanding, it's difficult to enforce, for example, a freeze order. With bank accounts, there are just accepted practices for freezing a bank account in a divorce situation. Well, that's not as clear in the divorce situation with crypto assets and wallets. Again, we have that issue about who is the order served on. Is it served on the divorce participant? Is it served on the wallet service? You know, that's kind of the issue. But we see that it is developing. It's not going to be a situation where it's not going to be addressed. Going back to the Center Tech case, the ICO wallet was frozen there. So this is an area where there is going to be enforcement. It's just going to be more costly to litigate if it's a contentious situation, and to enforce if it's a contentious divorce. So another area which is complicated with blockchains is copyright and blockchain. So a lot of people speak about blockchain, and they talk about how it's going to be better for intellectual property rights. It's going to equalize things. But actually, when you think about it, it makes copyright, it makes things more complicated for copyright holders. So for example, piracy by embedding materials in copyright holders is going to be more prevalent, and then it's distributed more easily and anonymously because it's been embedded by an unknown party on a ledger entry. As a result, this creates a situation where if you're the copyright holder, it's difficult to identify culpable parties for Digital Millennium Copyright Act takedown requests too. In addition to that, you're going to have, an inability to effectuate compliance with takedown requests when you're dealing with the immutable ledger entry. Can't really delete anything from a blockchain. Again, there's going to be infringement action difficulties. Who are you going to pursue? Who's liable? Is it the node operators who are disseminating this copyrighted material without necessarily even knowing about it? Is there a centralized party that you're going to go after on the blockchain? Because you're not going to be able to find the people who anonymously encrypted the data and embedded it on the ledger entry. So this kind of leads to the issue of node operator liability and how that's developing. So as we were talking about, basically anonymous parties can embed illegal materials on ledger entries. And this can take various forms. It could be in the form of the pirated copyright material we were talking about, to child pornography, state secrets, blackmail, and even malware. And node operators are forced to keep a copy of this embedded illegal materials, even if they're not aware it's on the ledger entry, because that's how the blockchain works. The issue is they become subject to potential liability for the crimes committed, even if they are unaware. So there's certain crimes, for example, that are strict liability, meaning you don't have to have intent or knowledge to be held liable for it. So for example, dissemination of state secrets in China is a strict liability crime, meaning if you're a node operator in China and you have now disseminated these state secrets that were embedded in a ledger entry and you didn't even know it was there, you didn't have knowledge of it, you didn't have intention to disseminate it, you're still liable for it. In fact, a couple weeks ago, the Chinese censor body just put out regulations saying that blockchain businesses and node operators in China are liable for the material that's on their blockchains. So that's a situation where they're directly being told that they are liable for anything on the blockchain. And that's an issue in terms of creating a threat to blockchain integrity. It creates a situation where these businesses and node operators are going to want to control governance and try to keep certain information off of the blockchain. And in fact, I think this situation in China is a direct result of the fact that early last year, blockchain, people in China were using it to basically engage in free speech by embedding this kind of material. And I think the government likely wants to cut back on that. So it creates a situation where they're directly telling blockchain businesses and node operators, you're liable for this. Additionally, going to kind of node operator and developer liability, you can think of it in issues where, it could even be negligence. So for example, if you're familiar with the Augur blockchain, so that's a situation where there has been basically an assassination market that's been created. And that's a situation where at some point, someone's going to get hurt, something may go wrong, and they're probably going to come after Augur for that because they're responsible for creating that situation that led to that market being created. So that could be an argument, potentially that there was negligence there. And one thing to consider with any of these kind of issues that arise is that given that it's going to be so complicated and that it may be difficult to locate the truly liable party, everyone else who has a connection to that transaction, especially any kind of centralized party and node operator, any developer, will be called into court to address that, and these issues will continue to be resolved in the courts to establish liability. So another area of concern with blockchains is privacy in blockchain. So in general, private data is more appropriate for private blockchains or permissioned blockchains. Think of this like HIPAA rules. You obviously don't want medical data on a public blockchain. Additionally, there is the issue about blockchain integrity and immutability. So for example, the EU's Global Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, is a real issue for blockchains because there is a right to be forgotten under GDPR, and this creates a threat to blockchain immutability because you're not able to delete anything on a blockchain. So a lot of blockchain businesses are either trying to avoid the EU or dealing with data controls to try to address issues related to GDPR. Additionally, this is going to be a broader issue that blockchain businesses will have to face because California has just passed a law that has a similar, provision. It will be going into effect in 2020. And so these businesses will have to be able to address these sort of issues as that law is put into effect. And given that it applies to California consumers, it's likely going to be a situation where the businesses have to adopt a common law for the whole country because they're not going to be able to really differentiate a California consumer who crosses the border into, for example, Nevada. How are they going to be able to say, well, we're going to have a separate rule for that person and we're going to be able to identify them as a California consumer versus the person who was in Nevada already? So as it is the case with a lot of California laws, California is on the forefront of more stringent regulation and laws, and other states and businesses, not only other states kind of follow in our footsteps, but businesses have to kind of take a consistent approach and apply the more stringent California standard just because they're not able to take, a stance of different standards per different states. All right, so now I will take some questions if people have questions.
And people can just put the questions in the chat function of Zoom if you have any.
All right, I'm not seeing any questions right now, so I can talk a little bit about a uniform law and then we can kind of end it there, Austin.
Yeah, we can just anyone who has any questions can put them in the chat while we're talking about this last topic. And if there's no questions by the end of that, then we can just end it.
Okay.
Oh, actually, we have someone raise their hand, so they might want to just like talk real quick. So I'll let them talk, and then we'll go from there.
Sure.
All right. Oh, I think. All right. So someone just asked in the Q&A, how much lawmaking is about blockchain?
Okay. I think the question is more in terms of regulations. So a lot of let me explain how law is made in the U.S. So in the U.S., a lot of law is basically made in the courts, and there's been technological innovation that's obviously happened before, and we have dealt with basically applying the law in an innovative way and having it adapt to the new technologies. And that's what's happening now. There's not specific blockchain or cryptocurrency laws that are being passed. The issue is because it's a new technology, as often happens, the existing laws may sometimes be trying to fit a square peg into a round hole, but that doesn't mean that the law doesn't apply. The law still applies. So it's more complicated and costly to comply, but you do have to comply. So for example, in the security situation, there's not new securities laws that are being passed, it's the existing securities laws. It's just blockchain businesses have to apply, and the fact that they were trying to, non-lawyers were trying to say it's a Wild West, I don't have to comply, is obviously the SEC and the courts are saying that makes no sense. You do have to comply. You are an investment vehicle. There are due diligence requirements. There are obligations to investors that need to be followed. Additionally, there are situations where it does make sense to maybe pass some new laws that are more blockchain specific. So this was one of the laws I was going to talk about, this Uniform Regulation of Virtual Currency Businesses Act. So right now, this deals with money transmission rules. So money transmission rules at this time are basically state specific. So you have to get a money transmission license in every state to be able to operate a money transition business. But the Uniform Law Commission, which is a law commission that proposes uniform laws. They've proposed this Uniform Regulation of Virtual Currency Businesses Act to create a new framework that allow for cryptocurrency blockchain businesses to more easily be able to obtain necessary licenses. And it'll create a situation where there are, certain exemptions, certain levels of registration, and then a fully registered status, as well as reciprocity between different states, so making it less costly to be able to get the money transition licensing. The second kind of really interesting thing about the rule is that given how the money transmission licensing laws are currently written, it's often the situation where even sending some cryptocurrency to your mom, or researchers sending cryptocurrency for research purposes is considered a money transmission, and you need a license for that. Well, that's not really a situation that makes sense. So this law would basically exclude those kind of situations. So it's not covering people who shouldn't be covered in it. This law is right now, the Uniform Law Commission has approved it. The American Bar Association supports it, but it's probably going to take a while to have it passed because each state has to pass it. And right now, there's been a situation where three states have put it up for just consideration. No one's really adopted it or voted on it yet. And it's something that may take, maybe 5 years, maybe a decade to get passed. The most kind of popular law that the Uniform Law Commission passed is the Uniform Commercial Code, which basically governs sales of goods, loans, all those kind of laws that we use on a day-to-day. So those laws used to be different among the 50 states. But, in the 40s, they started talking about this uniform law and then really drafted it in the 50s, and it took by the 60s to get it fully adopted. So it may be something that takes us a good decade or so to get into effect, but once we do have a uniform law, it'll be much easier for these blockchain businesses to transact their businesses. All right, let's see. What's the next question?
All right, so next question was by Mark. It's kind of just a statement to see what your thoughts on it are. He's heard that Bank of America holds most patents over blockchain technology and that patents are usually used to protect commercial interests of corporations.
Well, I'm not sure about if Bank of America has the most or not. I know I hear a lot about Walmart and IBM doing a lot. I know Bank of America is doing some there too, but patents are a way to protect your intellectual property. So that's any business, just as a general rule, it's important for them to take actions to protect their intellectual property, whether in the form of copyright, trademark, or patent, and sometimes all 3 or 4 forms of intellectual property can apply. Like I always, like to use the examples of, for example, Hershey Kisses, which have, trademark protection, for example, their shape. They have, patents for their formulas. They have, copyrights in terms of their advertisements. So it gives a competitive advantage for a business to be able to protect its intellectual property. Okay.
Okay, and then the next question that came in was from Ramon, asking what you think is going to be the most important regulation regarding blockchain business coming next year in the US.
Well, again, I don't think there's going to be any new regulations that are going to be instituted. I think the thing that's going to happen is we're going to have more SEC enforcement actions. We're going to have more blockchain businesses who had done, improper ICOs, basically reach out to the SEC and resolve the situation with them. There's now a path to compliance. So there's going to be businesses who engage in correcting this issue so that they can avoid being called into court, as happened with these entities basically on Friday. And the SEC also announced a statement saying that there's a path to compliance. If you did an illegal ICO, reach out to us, work with us to resolve it. That's going to be on the securities front. I think in terms of kind of what's going to be big in just blockchain in general in 2019, I think it's going to be increased enterprise applications. I think that's where we're going to see more blockchain projects, and I think that's how we're going to get widespread use cases. So for example, Walmart has a supply chain blockchain with IBM. They are telling their suppliers that they have to adopt this for widespread use for their greens in 2019. So seeing that kind of widespread adoption of the technology, I think will continue to promote more parties kind of understanding blockchain and deciding to use it for their businesses. All right, what's next?
The next question that came in was from Anisha asking, are blockchain and cybersecurity or cyber privacy closely tethered in terms of laws that apply?
So those are some, different issues. I mean, cybersecurity, I guess security and privacy are two different issues as well. One, blockchain obviously relates to these issues. So as we talked about the privacy issues and blockchain, there's some tension there because of the right to be forgotten and the fact that blockchain is a mutable ledger entry. Additionally, if you are dealing with a public blockchain, you may not want private data necessarily on that. You may want it to be permissioned. You may want it to be in a private blockchain. So those are some of the issues there. In terms of security, so first of all, businesses have a lot of issues with security in general. That good about having breach contingency plans in place and having policies and preparedness in place for any kind of breach or ransomware. Additionally, with blockchains, a lot of people talk about how it's unhackable. Well, that's not really accurate. It doesn't, it does create a situation where it's decentralized, but they're still being hacked. Just a couple months ago, there was several 51% attacks where, Bitcoin Gold was one of them, where 17 million was stolen, and basically the hackers were able to double spend again. They paid themselves out, and then they went back and returned their coins. So that's the problem. When you have any blockchain that's small, it's very subject to being able to be hacked. And the hackers don't even need that much money to be able to hack that blockchain, because they're able to rent miners for an hour, and that doesn't cost that much money. And the miners don't even know that they're part of this hack. And the hackers then able to use these rented miners and node operators to effectuate the 51% attack. In fact, just 2 weeks ago, there was a college student who was doing a live stream of a 51% attack he was doing. He didn't go through with it because he got cut off of, I guess, the streaming, but he was just showing how cheap and easy it is to do a 51% attack on these blockchains. All right, any other questions?
Yeah, it looks like our last question is from Mark again, and he's asking, has there been any case of blockchain patent infringement that forces a project or ICO to shut down?
I don't know about, there probably is some kind of patent infringement. Like if it's resolved outside of court, it's not public knowledge. So that's not something we would see. Additionally, I have heard of cases of, other intellectual property infringement that has caused businesses in the blockchain space, where it has caused businesses to have to change their business, name or model because they have engaged in infringement. So regardless of whether you are a blockchain business or any kind of other business, if you are infringing, you have to, you're going to have to change your business and do something different or rebrand it. Okay, I see there's some other questions coming in, right, Austin?
Yeah, we got one more from Ramon asking, do you expect any time big national states adopting cryptocurrency as fiat money for some particular purposes like international trade payments?
Okay, I'm not sure 100% what you're asking, but I think I'm going to interpret as whether I see, states adopting cryptocurrency as just the money they use as, their day to day. 40 states that are using basically either have issued or are going to issue state issued cryptocurrencies. So Venezuela has the Petra, which is, tied to the gasoline. It's arguably it hasn't been, there's some issues there. I don't think it's done very well. Russia is issuing its crypto ruble. Estonia is doing a state issued cryptocurrency. Iran is apparently doing a state issued cryptocurrency to try to get around sanctions. Additionally, I think that since we already transact in digital currencies, around cash around, especially in big cities like LA, where I'm based. So I think that the US is going to issue its own digital currency down the road, especially since so many other people are trying to do this whole stable coin thing and basically tie it to fiat. I think we're just going to have a US coin from the government because the government's going to want to retain control over this system. And two, in addition to wanting to retain the control, they will be able to get widespread usage because they will be able to provide FDIC insurance, something that other cryptocurrencies that are not government backed can't do. They can incentivize use by people who are blockchain proponents, but even providing, for example, tax incentives. And for people who don't understand blockchain or cryptocurrency, they can promote its adoption given that it's backed by the government, and that gives it extra legitimacy and veracity in the eyes of those people who don't really understand cryptocurrency and blockchain. So I think that's where we're probably headed, and that's how we get kind of widespread usage and adoption, because until we have less volatility and we have more people willing to accept this, we're not going to get cryptocurrencies used, for example, for employment wages, because no one's going to want something that's one value when you're paid out, but by the time you cash out, or for brick and mortar, until we can have some consistency in values and some trust that, for example, it's insured. All right. Is that it, Austin? No more questions?
All right. Yeah, it looks like all the questions that have been submitted so far. So yeah, we can end it now since we've had plenty of time for people to type in their questions. So yeah, thank you very much for presenting for us. And if anyone would like to know anything about anything more about ideas, we have I showed the website at the start. It's ideassn.org. And Morvareed, do you have anything else to add?
No, I'm always happy to help anyone who has, any questions or is working in the space and needs help navigating the space. My contact info is on the slide. I'm at Salehpour, Salehpour, law.com, and my email is msalehpour, Salehpour at salehpourlaw.com, and you can follow me on LinkedIn as well if you're interested in kind of just seeing some of the articles I write and the other speaking I do in the space, and kind of my thoughts on how the blockchain space is developing.
Okay, great. All right, thank you very much, and everyone have a great end to your weekend.
Thank you, Austin.